Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon.
Please welcome the founder and president of PJTN, Laurie Cardoza Moore.
Ladies and gentlemen, we live at a very dangerous time in history. All you have to do is look at what's happening in our communities, on our college campuses, in our K-12 textbooks around the world. This BDS movement is based on the false narrative that Israel is an apartheid state. If anybody understands apartheid, it is South Africa. And you know, as well as I do, that Israel does not represent those principles or those values. And I've come to you because the Lord opened the door for me to be here and to bring you this message. That if we are going to address anti-Semitism, it must be addressed through the church, and it must be addressed through South Africa. We have an opportunity. You, as South Africans, have an opportunity to speak to the nations of the world and proclaim justice on Israel's behalf. So, is Israel an apartheid state, ladies and gentlemen? No. Look at the blessing that they are to really all of us around the world, because the world is using the technology and the research that is coming out of Israel. So literally, Genesis 12:3, God said, I will bless those who bless you and curse him who curses you. And all the nations of the world will bless themselves by you. And we certainly have been blessed. And of course, us as people of faith, we have the Jewish people to thank for our Messiah. We have the Jewish people to thank for our Bible. They have preserved the Word of God, the Torah, and the prophets throughout the centuries. So we owe a huge debt of gratitude to our Jewish brethren. And that's why we're here. I want to thank all my panelists for joining us. Let's talk about the church and what can we do within our congregations to really see some real change, especially as it pertains to what we see happening. Has Christ at the Checkpoint come to South Africa? And what can we as Christians do within our congregations to push for this change?
You need to have it clear in your mind that God is on the move with Israel. If you don't have that clear in your mind, then you will lack the conviction to do anything significant. And I would challenge everybody in this room, get that conviction in your mind. Secondly, I think that what we need to understand is there is a massive onslaught on the church in South Africa at the moment. It's not a coincidence that two major churches have taken a decision to stand against Israel. I was at a conference, Christ at the Checkpoint, South African equivalent, 2 weeks ago, and I saw the sort of onslaught on the church in South Africa. It is a total onslaught. At the theological level, eroding Israel's validity from a biblical point of view, and then painting a picture of the Middle East which is totally misrepresented of what the facts are on the ground. And I want to say that it's coming to a church near you, and it's coming to your pulpit sooner than you think. If you do not act, and if you do not mobilize, and start to become an activist for Israel. And you need to do that. As I saw just a few weeks ago, we were in Durban doing a program. We had 2 Anglicans in our program, and they were there to equip themselves. They were going for their priest in no unmeasured manner, because they realized that a priest who sort of sits, well, I'm sort of on the fence on this thing, I don't think it's a big issue, they need to turn it into a big issue for him. This is a life and death struggle for the church in South Africa. And unfortunately, the government is given the leeway it needs because of the church's silence on the matter. So it's vital that every one of us mobilizes, every one of us becomes vocal, and every one of us be prepared to actually put ourselves on the line. Because if we don't do that, it's not enough to still just pray another prayer. It's not enough to sign another petition, and I don't want to undermine either of those. But if you do not get out of your seat and become active in this, you're losing ground, because the enemies of Israel are doing exactly that. They're the ones that are there. They're the ones that are active. They're the ones that are reaching a church which is largely ignorant. And unfortunately, as I saw at the conference 2 weeks ago, not only are senior leaders in the church in South Africa biblically ignorant about Israel, but also they get swept off their feet emotionally when it comes to the narrative around Israel. So you have to be out there challenging your leader, trying to create an opportunity for them to get educated. And that's why you have organizations like those represented here, is to provide that education into the church in South Africa.
Very good, thank you. So Vivian, let's talk about making that change and a grassroots movement. You've been involved with ICEJ here in doing that, so has Safi. What can people do on a grassroots level to work with organizations like yours, like Safi, like PJTN? Because I'm sure there's many people in here that are not familiar with the organization or aren't members of either of these organizations. What would you say to them?
Well, obviously become a member, get the information, like the Facebook pages. The battle is in the media today. We saw that in 2014, and we've seen a potential. They're saying what's happening in Israel right now is as close as what was happening in 2014. And the media used that to demonize Israel. And we're at risk of that happening again. So get the facts yourself and fight the battle in the media yourself on social media. Join Laurie's organization, join Bridges for Peace, join Safi, join ICEJ, like our Facebook pages, share those posts, and start to create a momentum. I have an Israeli friend here who lived in Israel, so she knows what happens. She's very active on Facebook, and she almost on a daily basis posts the facts of what's going on in Israel. And almost on a weekly basis, she gets banned from Facebook and has to change her account and re-get herself on, and she's actually losing hope. And I'm saying we as Christians need to stand with them. South Africa is 80% Christian, and we are silent. It's deafening our silence, and it reminds me of what happened before the Holocaust. And it is a lack of knowledge, and they're not getting the knowledge from the churches. So we need to get the grassroots, educate ourselves, don't believe the media, and search and research for yourself. And the information's out there. As I say, just educate yourself around that. But we are excited to see, even just talking into the BDS quickly, about what's happening in South Africa. I mean, the BDS has just had a big failure with the Clover situation example now, where they've actually backed down on the Clover deal, which, just for your information, is worth $4 billion. I mean, it's like a ridiculous amount of rands in South Africa. And it's been linked to an incredible amount of jobs, to empowering black farmers as part of this deal. And BDS has been put under pressure to say, back down, because who are you supporting here? Are you supporting our nation and our jobs and our people, or are you going to support this narrative around BDS, which is actually just based on lies anyway, and supporting oppressive regimes like Hamas and the PA in their agenda? So play your role in being a voice in that space by educating yourself and getting the knowledge. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Steve Swart, if you would be so kind to introduce yourself, one of the longest political leaders as a member of parliament. That's impressive.
Thank
Even
you.
coming from the United States of America. Steve, if you would be so kind to introduce yourself and then discuss the government position on Israel, and for this to include the downgrade of the embassy.
Thank you, Dr. Laurie, and good evening, everyone. Boker Tov. Boker Tov. At Springboks.
Good evening.
The rugby. So my name is Steve Swart. There's a there is a member who is the longest serving from the ACDP, and that's Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, who are honored tonight. He's my colleague, and we've got our Deputy President, Wayne Thring, who is a member of Parliament as well here tonight.
Fantastic.
So we're honored.
Welcome.
Thank you, Wayne, for being here as well tonight. So for me, it's always been a passion. It's been a God-given real passion to stand with Israel and the Jewish people. A month ago tonight, I was in the Great Synagogue in Jerusalem, and I was honored to meet the president. And there again, I just had such a sense that the president there said, "You're in the most expensive seat in the house tonight." And I realized that I can never repay that, but I can recommit myself to stand with Israel and the Jewish people. And I'm really proud that I'm probably the only member of Parliament that's ever said in Parliament, "Ham Yisrael Chai." It's recorded in Parliament, "Ham Yisrael Chai." And so from the word go, we have stood. And my leader, Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, has taught me, but it's been a God-given desire to stand. And the four of us in Parliament will continue to stand. My colleague last week stopped, he issued a statement just out of the blue about Israel. Why do you call for boycotts against Israel when you're not doing anything against the atrocities? So Wayne, well done to that. So every opportunity we have, we will block anti-Israel sentiments, and we'll try to expose what is actually going on.
Amen.
So when you go quickly on the embassy downgrade, I've got so much to say, but it's absolutely disgraceful. It's disgraceful that there should be even a consideration of a downgrade. And we need to understand that it is a political move, again, from BDS Movement, from people that have got to make this narrative work. And that's why, Dr. Laurie, you've identified, if we can defeat this narrative in South Africa and the BDS, it will fall worldwide, because this is their stronghold right here. But so we sit with this dilemma in the ANC government, that the government in foreign affairs does not want to break diplomatic ties, because obviously when you differ from a country, you want diplomatic ties. But the ANC passed a party resolution to downgrade. So now there's a dilemma. But thanks be to God, and we continue to pray that 2 years later, the downgrade has not yet happened. Today, there was a question in
Thank
Parliament.
God.
Again, when's it going to happen? And they're saying, we're busy dealing with it, My reading is that President Ramaphosa does not want to downgrade, but we see the minister with the vitriol that she brought recently at the United Nations Security Council. So within the ANC, there is this contention. And we've got to continue applying pressure to prevent it happening. There must be streets. We love the Jewish people and Israel, but there must be action as well. Thank you, Dr. Laurie. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I have one more question for you. And what is it that the citizens of South Africa can do to help encourage that change? Because, for me, before I even came here, the statement that was made by your president, acknowledging the technology advancements in Israel and how South Africa can actually benefit from that. What can the citizens do? Because a lot of people, no matter what government it is that I speak to, that doesn't support Israel, the citizens feel like they have no other option, that there's no recourse to try to make the change. Speaking to the citizens of this great country, what can they do?
Well, first of all, vote the party that is passing these policies out. We've just had elections. So surely, if our Jewish colleagues tell us there are almost 18 million Christian Zionists in this country, and we've got to educate, when it comes to voting, what are the policies that are being stood that most people would not accept, the anti-Israel policies. We've got the Shembi Church, we've got the ZCC churches. These are massive churches. So we need voter education. We've had the elections. Our party grew. But just think if we had 30, 40 MPs, that every opportunity we could stand for Israel and other related issues. Second issue is politicians look for numbers. That's why that petition is very significant. We need numbers, but we don't want tens of thousands. We need hundreds of thousands of signatures. And then we need to start marching on Parliament. Marching. Politicians look to see feet on the ground. Why do the Muslims march so much? Why are we intimidated? It's time to start standing up and putting action to our words. And that will change things in this nation.
Amen. So you heard it. So we need to mobilize, ladies and gentlemen. Mama Lima Molepo, if you would be so kind to introduce yourself and your background, and also talk about the situation on the university campus for students regarding anti-Semitism, Israel, and the IAW.
I'm a student at the University of Cape Town and a SAFI coordinator, South African Friends of Israel Western Cape coordinator. And I got involved with Israel through having gone there on a trip and to go and see it for myself after having been encompassed with negative sentiments around Israel through joining politics on campus. And throughout then, I've been advocating for Israel throughout university campuses here in South Africa and in the United States. And I've been listening to anti-Israel sentiments just across throughout the countries, and you just see how it's just one manufactured rage throughout. And also speaking out on Israel has been one way of being able to reconnect myself to my grandmother's love for God as well, and for my own love for God, and for my grandmother's teachings on how to love God, and to continue praying for the peace of Jerusalem, and to continue being a person that adds to the bricks that support and surround and defend Jerusalem at all times.
I would like to ask you, because we see the anti-Semitic incidents and rallies occurring on the college campuses, is this a problem on college campuses throughout this country?
The main problem around college campuses in South Africa is the narrative, and the narrative where people have kind of taken the apartheid narrative and they've applied it to the Israel-Palestine situation. And within that, then people kind of shut down when it comes to having to delve deeper into the situation and look at what is going on. It's not as violent as it is in the US, but in terms of isolation of people, you do get isolated for speaking up for Israel. You do get made up the political and the social pariah on campus, and it's not as violent, but it does need more speaking up, because I think the biggest thing that I've really realized over the past year is that people aren't so much afraid to listen to you, but people are just engulfed by the negativity, and they'd rather stay away from having to listen to anything about Israel, simply because there's so much negative things that are spoken about Israel. So the biggest thing that we really have right now is that we need to be speaking up. We need to be reaching out to all the people that we don't reach out to the silent majority that exists, because really there's only 10% of people that really care about what's going on with Israel, be it people that support Israel or be it people that speak out against Israel. And that 90% in the middle that exists are people that need to be spoken to, and people that need to be engaged on a daily basis, and people that need to be spoken about not just on the religious significance of Israel, but equally on the social significance of Israel, on the business significance of Israel, on every single aspect of Israel that needs to be there to promote Israel and to promote the people of Israel, and to ensure that Israel will continue being a nation 15, 20, 30 years, 150 years from now.
Ben, my last question to you would be, what would you recommend to our audience to get involved in what's happening on the college campuses? You've witnessed this growth. What would you say to encourage our guests tonight to get involved in fighting this battle?
I come from the Western Transvaal, which was, and probably still is, the most conservative part of South Africa. I witnessed with my own eyes, growing up there, the horrors of apartheid. And even as a young kid, 8, 9, I could actually see what was happening. And I can't accept the mantra that I never knew what was going on, as many people said, and many people in Germany said as well. When I went to university, I got involved in politics, and I was being tracked by by the secret police, and my mother packed me off to Israel, and that was really the start of my connection with Israel. I studied at the Hebrew University and grew to love Jerusalem, and have loved it ever since. I think Vivian and Chris mentioned getting the information. Knowing the truth and speaking the truth, that's what it's all about. And the information is there, but there's a lot of misinformation. Your film, one of the people interviewed there quoted from Matthew, and he spoke about the deception. And I think that is one of the problems that BDS is doing. It is deceiving us all about the truth. And not only that, but it is using the deception as a way of deflecting attention from what is happening to Christians in the Middle East. Right now, as we sit here, 22,000 Christians in 33 villages along the Turkish border are being displaced. And they are some of the oldest Christians around. And many of them will die, and many of them will be homeless. In the Palestinian territories, Bethlehem had a majority of Christians not many years ago, and now they're a minority. All over the Middle East, Christians are being slaughtered, discriminated against, and harassed. And I think, I've got to say this here. I applaud your stand, and I applaud Vivian's stand in the International Christian Embassy and Bridges for Peace, the stand that you take in support of Jews. But I also think that we need to give some thought to all those Christians that are suffering daily.
Thank you. You bring up a very good point. Because one of the things that we've seen is the rise, along with the rise of anti-Semitism, we're also witnessing a rise of anti-Christian bigotry around the world. Don't you find it interesting that they are targeting Jews and Christians, the people of the book? If we don't see the correlation there, Ben's absolutely right. We need to speak up on behalf of the Christians as well. And I want to thank all of our panelists. Can we give them all a hand, please? I also want to thank the church for hosting us and all the volunteers who helped make this program possible. I want to thank all of you because I want to leave you with a message as you leave here and you go home. You're here tonight for a special reason. You may have decided to make the choice to be here, but God ordained for you to be here, for this event to happen before the foundations of the earth. And He gave you life in your soul. He put your soul in your physical body. And He's given each one of you a unique gift that only you can fulfill. And I will pray for you, but as you go before the Lord and you ask Him, what is my role in this hour? Don't squander the time we've been given. We have been brought into the last days to be a voice on behalf of our Jewish brethren, to fight for the state of Israel that God foretold would come to life back again. And this generation will not pass before He returns. So I pray the Lord's blessing as you go. And Father God, I pray for each person who is sitting before us tonight, that you would speak to them in the way and in the voice that they understand, and show them what step they can take. Give them the courage, even when it doesn't make sense in their mind, to take a stand and to do their part. And Father, I pray for South Africa. Steve was right when he said it has to change here. And if you can take back the narrative, South Africa, and you can confront those who are misleading the world about Israel, then your blessing is yet to come. He has heard your prayers. But faith without works is no faith at all. It's going to take action. You have to make the first step. And as Steve says, if South Africa can overturn the false narrative of Israel, apartheid, and BDS, then the nations of the world and even the church can be restored again. I want to thank you all. God bless you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren and for the state of Israel. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.